Nepal's newest generation of voters is demanding a shift in how the state operates. This Gen Z demographic is looking for a right to delivery, where starting a business happens online, tax systems are simplified, and services go fully digital. To meet these expectations, the government recently introduced its spending plan, a 21.24 karba, or roughly 2.1 trillion rupee, national budget. On the surface, the document adopts the vocabulary of this younger generation. It proposes slashing the number of federal ministries from 22 down to 18, eliminating dozens of redundant agencies, and outlines plans for national AI integration. But while the budget uses the language of the future, the foundational math tells a different story. When you look past the modern buzzwords, the financial framework remains tied to an older, more cautious system. Capital expenditure, money for development, sits at 431 billion rupees. Next to it, the budget to pay off old debts is 422 billion. This development fund represents barely 5% of Nepal's GDP. That's a remarkably small fraction dedicated to future growth. This ratio exposes a severe economic trap. The state spends nearly as much capital managing the burden of its past as it does building its future. Escaping this cycle of low investment and low revenue requires a highly concentrated economic maneuver known as the Big Push. The Big Push theory argues that developing nations only achieve wealth through massive, concentrated state investment in specific high-growth sectors. The goal is to provide the initial fuel necessary for the market to gain its own momentum. South Korea demonstrated this by funneling resources into steel and heavy industry until they could compete globally. Taiwan followed the same model by concentrating its capital on semiconductor manufacturing. Today, India is applying this logic to solar energy, mobilizing massive capital to dominate the sector. Nepal's current budget correctly identifies its own high-potential sectors: energy and digital technology. The document proposes a sovereign AI data center, utilizing hydropower to fuel digital services, and offering a 50% tax break on information technology exports. Identifying these sectors is a necessary first step, but without the concentrated financial firepower required to build these industries, the strategy remains a list of goals rather than a functioning economy. Instead of a concentrated push, execution follows a sprinkler effect. The government splinters capital across dozens of areas to satisfy political demands. This spreads capital thin. $302 billion goes to infrastructure, $218 billion to education, and $96 billion to health. While infrastructure and education receive hundreds of billions, the Ministry of Youth and Labor is allocated just 3.62 billion rupees. With such a small investment in domestic labor and job creation, thousands of young Nepalis continue to seek employment abroad, leaving the economy dependent on the money they send back home. When a budget tries to give a little bit to everyone, it fails to achieve the critical mass necessary to change the economic reality. This scattered spending sits on top of a revenue system where 70% of the tax burden comes from indirect consumption, hitting the poorest hardest. Compounding this is asare bitas, the systemic habit of rushing through the development budget in the final month of the fiscal year. Sri Lanka provides a direct warning. Even after its financial crisis, that government recognized the need to mandate a 4% minimum for capital expenditure and raise capital gains taxes to sustain its recovery. Nepal continues to avoid these difficult choices. By failing to strengthen taxes on property and capital gains, the state remains trapped in a cycle where low revenue prevents the very investments needed to grow the tax base. The budget functions as a political balancing act. It uses the modern language expected by the youth, but it stops short of taking the economic risks required to build their future. The government has mapped out the right sectors and adopted the right themes, but until the financial commitment matches that vision, the Big Push remains a goal on paper rather than a reality on the ground.